All right. All right. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Tahoe Home Retrofit Workshop. We are so excited to have you here today to learn how to harden your home against wildfire. I'm Carly Murphy, and I'm the coordinator of the Tahoe Network of Fire Adapted Communities, and I'll be facilitating tonight's workshop. So while we wait for a few more people to trickle in, I'm going to launch a poll just to help us get to know you a little better. All right, so we are hoping that you can fill out the poll that's up on your screen right now and let us know where you're joining us from. Are you coming from South Lake Tahoe? Maybe you're coming from North Lake, Reno, Sacramento, elsewhere. Go ahead and fill out that poll. We also have a question. Question number 2 is, have you ever heard of home hardening? Is this a completely new concept to you, brand new, or maybe you have been implementing home hardening techniques on your home for years? So let us know how you're looking on the poll here. I'll just give it a little longer, let everybody answer. Looking like we have a lot of people from South Lake and North Lake and elsewhere in California. And a majority of people have heard of home hardening before, so that is really good to know. And here are our results if you are interested in seeing our split here. Looks like elsewhere in California won. I wonder where all of you are coming from. All right. So thank you for participating in that poll. We should be ready to start now. I think we've got lots of people in now. So for those of you who just logged in, again, my name is Carly Murphy, and I am the coordinator of the Tahoe Network of Fire Adapted Communities, and I'll be facilitating the Tahoe Home Retrofit Workshop. We're super excited to have such a great turnout with local and national experts here tonight to help you learn how to harden your home against wildfire. So before we fully dive in, I just want to give everybody a very brief introduction to Zoom. This is kind of our new reality, so I'd imagine many of you already know how to use Zoom, but a couple of features I want everybody to be aware of. In the bottom left hand of your screen, you can mute and share your video. We are asking that everybody keeps their videos off. We do want to stay connected with you and see you, but we're a little concerned about our bandwidth issues and all of that because we had a lot of people very interested. So feel free to turn that video off. You also shouldn't be able to unmute yourself, so you shouldn't have to deal with those controls really at all. The next feature I want to point out is the chat box. So in the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat box feature, and that is how we are going to be recording all questions for our Q&A session after the presenters. So feel free to open that chat box up. We'll also be sharing helpful links throughout the presentation in that chat box. And you will be allowed to chat with 3 of us, so myself, Carly, Nicole Shaw, and Amanda Malishi. So feel free to drop us a question in there if you have one throughout the event. You can also leave at any time if you have kids you need to feed or dogs barking or anything like that. You're welcome to leave the meeting by pressing that leave button on the bottom right. And then last thing I wanted to draw your attention to is we are recording tonight's workshop. We're hoping we will be posting it on YouTube for future use, and I'll be sending a follow-up email hopefully tomorrow with the recording links as well as other information for you to help get prepared. All right, so without further ado, welcome to the Tahoe Home Retrofit Workshop. Again, this workshop is facilitated by the Tahoe Network of Fire Adapted Communities in coordination with the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension and the University of California Cooperative Extension. Additional support, including some funding support, come from the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, Tahoe Living with Fire, the Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team, CAL FIRE, and California Climate's Investments Program, which I feel like I'm on radio talking about drug side effects here because it's a long list of people, but we truly are so grateful for everybody who has helped us make this happen. This is a very large partnership, and we're just extremely grateful to be bringing this workshop to you tonight. All right, so our lineup for tonight, we are going to kick it off with a presentation from Christina Restano, with the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension, and then Susie Coker with the University of California Cooperative Extension. And then our third presentation will be from Steve Quarles, formerly with the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety and the University of California Cooperative Extension. And after we hear from these three presenters, we're going to open it up for Q&A. And so put those questions in the chat box if you have them. And I am now going to stop talking and turn it over to Christina Restano, who is an assistant professor with assistant professor and natural resource specialist with the University of Nevada, Reno Extension, and is the director of the Living with Fire program. Christina will be providing us with an overview of fire in Tahoe and is setting the stage for why home hardening is so important. So get Christina's presentation up real quick.
All right, hello everybody, and thanks for coming. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up my short presentation here. So as was already mentioned, my job tonight is to set the stage for why living with fire in the Tahoe Basin is something that we have to think about and really consider as we choose to live in this area. And this is not a unique story for where we live here. This is the same case for a lot of places in the Western United States. So fire is a critical part of our landscape here. And here is this map that any friends of mine that are actual cartographers will not be impressed with. But it's a very interesting map to me because it shows just the preponderance of fire that we have on the landscape, both in the Tahoe Basin and surrounding it. So this map only captures data from 1950 to 2011. So we're missing some big fires, but it still drives home that point that even in that short time period, all of the areas in red burned in a wildfire during that time period. So we are used to having a lot of fire around here, and we should expect even more in the future. So living with fire in this type of environment requires adaptation. It requires us as homeowners and residents in the basin to think about this, and also the land management agencies that are responsible for managing large swaths of land throughout the region. We do this by doing fuel treatments, prescribed fire, and then in the resident and the homeowner side, we do it with thinking about defensible space and home hardening. So living with fire in this landscape that we live in, oftentimes because folks are so successful at doing projects and putting fires out on the landscape, we've been lucky enough that we haven't had a lot of large catastrophic fires. But in 2007, we obviously had a very large fire that took down 254 structures. It required 2,100 folks to actually work on suppressing the fire, and it was very expensive. To contain it was $13 million, and the damage sustained to property was $140 million. So in this area that's so prone to wildfire, sometimes we can end up getting a catastrophic fire. And what did we learn from that? So what did we learn from what we saw in the Angora fire? There was a bi-state commission put together that most of you probably know about that studied kind of what were the lessons learned after this large event. And we learned principally that in terms of home loss, in the neighborhoods where homes were lost, flames spread from home to home as embers from one structure landed on the other. So it really taught us a lesson that homes really are a large component of the fuel on the landscape. So the major factors that were found of home loss were lack of defensible space around your home, firewood piled near your home, so right up against the house or on your deck, very dry decks adjacent to the home, and then of course, construction materials that your home is made out of that are vulnerable to fire. So what we learned in this is that, and what we've learned from the campfire in the Oroville area and the Nuns and Tubbs fire in the Santa Rosa area, are that structures are fuel and they increase our fire risk in communities that are embedded in the wildland urban interface. So as you can see here on the right is a map showing a gradient of fire risk, blue being moderate fire risk, red being extreme. And this is a map of the west shore of the Tahoe Basin, where it's showing clearly that there's significantly more fire risk in the communities around the basin than in the wilderness adjacent to the basin. So really thinking about the fact that that risk of loss to property and values of concern are really highest in the neighborhoods in the Tahoe Basin. And so what we need to be doing is we need to be treating entire landscapes. And this is a problem that needs to be attacked from multiple scales in the Tahoe Basin and all throughout the Sierra Nevada and the West in general. What is amazing is that there is a lot of work being done in the Tahoe Basin to do exactly this. On the left-hand side here is a map of the Lake Tahoe West Restoration Partnership domain. And this is a multi-agency collaboration to treat 60,000 acres on the West Shore for fuels. And what's great about this is it's an example of collaboration and partnership and really moving the needle on getting more projects done on the ground more efficiently. On the right-hand side is a map of the domain of the PTEIR landscape, which is also the Programmatic Timberland Environmental Impact Review, which is another example of a large-scale planning process that is helping us move the needle to get approval for doing these large-scale fuel treatments. So the public-owned land there's a lot of effort happening to get those fuels treated, but there's also a lot of small parcels that individual homeowners can work on to take our actions seriously to really contribute to trying to move the needle on getting our landscapes more resilient for fire. And so it's complicated because we have this large mosaic of land ownership. And here's just a screenshot of the neighborhood that I have a home in. And I'm surrounded by land owned by the state and the federal government and private landowners. And so when I look at the fire risk in my neighborhood, I have to think about what my neighbors are doing and what I'm doing individually to really be part of that larger solution to this fire risk problem that we have in the Tahoe Basin. And so what specialists suggest is that we all take a coupled approach to preparing for fire on our individual properties. And that means that we work on creating our defensible space, which Susie Coker is going to talk about more today, and that we take steps to actually harden our home by modifying the components that our home is made out of to make them more resistant to wildfire, both in terms of ember and flame intrusions. And so Steve Quarles is going to talk more about that specifically today. And so I just leave us with a question of, are you ready for the next wildfire? Here is a map of all of the wildfires that have occurred. It does not include the little tiny ones that occurred this past year, but it goes up until 2016 at the Emerald Fire. As you can see on this landscape in the basin, we have not experienced a lot of large fires, and that's mainly because we have such incredible agency cooperation and folks working on the ground to make sure that our fuels are treated and that our effective and safe response of our fire protection districts and CAL FIRE and other agencies are on it in order to stop these large fires. But they can't do it without us. And so we have to do our part to make sure that we get our work done as well as folks that own land and property in the Tahoe Basin. So that's all I have for you today. Just wanted to put some information up here about my email address if you have any questions for me, and the two websites that have a lot of information for folks. And then to keep with trying to keep this a more interactive workshop, we're going to ask you guys some more poll questions, and you'll see these throughout the workshop today. So we want to know how many folks here have been impacted personally by the wildfire. And this can be a wide range of things, from I've had my power shut off, which a lot of us experienced last year. I have had smoke persistent throughout the fire season. I've been evacuated. I've actually lost a home or a structure. And if you click yes to that, I'm very sorry for that loss for you. or no, you have not been impacted. I do think it's hard to find somebody who can't click on one of those in the Sierra Nevada region at this point, especially in terms of smoke and power safety shutoffs. And then we are also finding that a lot of us, and this has happened to me in Tahoe, where I've been dropped from my insurance, and then my insurance has been raised annually pretty significantly. And so have you lost or had to change your homeowner's insurance because of the risk of fire in your neighborhood? So if we take a few minutes to answer those, and then Carly will show us the results, and then we'll move on to Susie.
All right, I think we're ready to share the results. So they should be up on your screen now.
Yeah, so we do see that there is somebody on this call, or maybe one or two people who have lost their home. So very sorry to hear that. 17% have had to be evacuated due to wildfire. 70%, and we have 182 folks on this. So 70% have had to deal with persistent smoke in the fire season, and 35% have had their power shut off. And then again, if you see 34% of folks have had to change or lose their homeowner's insurance because of fire risk. So this is certainly a persistent concern in our region. Anyways, I'm gonna hand it over to Susie. Thank you all for listening. Take care.
Well, I'm gonna cut in first.
Okay, sorry about that, Carly.
You're fine. Thank you so much, Christina. That was really, really helpful for setting kind of the context. So next up, we're going to hear from Susie Coker, who is a forestry advisor at the University of California Cooperative Extension, Central Sierra, and is a registered professional forester. Susie will be providing us with an overview of defensible space and why reducing the risk of home structure loss from wildfire requires this coupled approach between home hardening and defensible space that Christina just touched on. So Susie, you can go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Carly, and thanks, Amanda. And so I want to hammer in on this message of the coupled approach. So in this picture, you see a home and you see some garden around it. You may notice that the home has a wood shake roof, which looks like risk. And the front yard also has a layer of ornamental junipers right underneath a tree, which could be considered a ladder fuel. So you would really need to be addressing both of these issues if you want to reduce the likelihood of your home igniting during a fire, because these things are so close to each other. So that's what we mean by the coupled approach, that both of these things need to be addressed in order to reduce your risk. I think defensible space is something that most people have heard of, but they may not know as much about what to do about their homes. So my talk will be brief, since you've probably heard some of it before, and we'll save the rest of the time for Steve to talk about home components and how to make those more resistant. So here is a schematic of defensible space. Defensible space is having an area around your home that's managed so that it does not lead your home to be caught on fire during a wildfire event. So you'll notice here that we have 3 zones laid out. We have a 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone, 5 to 30 foot lean, clean, and green zone. You should be able to see my cursor here, zone 1, and then the reduced fuel zone from 30 to 100 feet. It is a law in California in fire hazard areas that you must maintain defensible space for 100 feet. In most of the state, this is interpreted with the 30 foot and the 100 foot zone, but we in Tahoe really have pioneered this concept of the 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone because of requirements for water quality best management practices. We have been kind of ahead, I think, of the rest of the state on this concept of this closest zone, and it is really important. It's obviously the zone closest to the home, and so the whole part of the yard and landscape that needs the most attention. So here's a little blow up of that area. All these graphics are from our new Tahoe home retrofit guide that we'll be coming out with in the next couple of months, and you'll see a home with a gravel trench around it. For people in Tahoe, those should look familiar. They're also considered to be water infiltration trenches, which is a best management practice for infiltrating stormwater and reducing erosion from your property. So some of you probably already have those, but in this case, it's been extended around the entire home, even the areas that don't drain from the roof. Because it is a good way to have a non-combustible zone around the home. The function is to make sure there's nothing there that could catch on fire when ember storms come, since so many homes catch on fire from embers, as Christina explained. Having anything flammable that could touch the siding of your house or your deck or the wood parts is specifically very risky. And so we recommend nothing at all that's flammable within that first 5 feet. No plants, no mulch, no pine needles, nothing stored, nothing at all. And that may seem a little stark to some people, but it can be made to look good. I have some nice pictures coming up where it doesn't look too bad, and it definitely reduces your risk. So in this picture, you'll notice it's also underneath the deck. If you have outbuildings or a deck or attachments to your home, you should think of 5 feet around them as well. So here's a picture of a home that mostly does it. I don't really like this tree at the back here. With my cursor, you can see it. It's within that 5 foot zone, but you see in front of the home, there's a walkway. This has very effectively reduced any connectivity between vegetation and the home. Here's another picture from our master gardeners of someone who's done a nice hardscape with kind of a trail. It looks attractive. This picture is pretty common for people who live in Tahoe. Someone has put in a lot of rock probably for their best management practices, so there's no erosion during rainstorms, but it's underneath the deck. You can see there's nothing flammable within 5 feet of any of that home component. So this is really what we're recommending, nothing touching the home. This is really difficult for some people who have learned the concept of foundation planting, and you can still find this concept out there if you look it up on the internet, landscape architects, real estate companies. Even in California in fire hazard zones are recommending people do foundation plantings to plant and cover up their foundation and add some pop to their real estate, add to their curb appeal. And I think a lot of us grew up with that, but I think we seriously need to unlearn this concept. This picture is of a fire in Gardnerville in 2016 that was started when someone in the apartment building threw a cigarette out the window into a clump of juniper, of ornamental juniper that was not irrigated or maintained. You can see it was trimmed. If you look on the right-hand picture, you can see kind of what the juniper plantings look like. And it led to a lot of negative impacts. So we don't like juniper in particular as a species. It's very flammable, and certainly you should not have it anywhere within 5 feet of your home or in some other important places. Let's see, I thought I had another picture. I guess it's later, sorry about that. Even within this 5 to 30 feet zone, there's plenty of places that you shouldn't be putting ornamental juniper as well. So the 5 to 30 feet zone is the next zone. Definitely that's where your garden and your landscaping and your maintained yard is. The goal in this zone is to minimize the chance that a fire could climb up into any kind of tree or shrub or approach the house. You don't want a lot of vegetation or mulch or pine needles that connect to the other parts of your house. So the goal there is to get rid of dead vegetation, maintain space, get rid of any kind of ladder fuels underneath a tree, shrubs growing under trees that then will let the fire get into the crown and then contact the house. And this is usually your irrigated zone. Here's the picture I was looking for. Even in this zone, you should be careful of where you plant because there are special parts of the house which are more vulnerable than others. For example, under the eaves or vents, if you planted something, say 6 feet from the home that caught on fire from an ember. It would be a ready source of embers to get into the vents. So you want to specifically avoid areas, even in this 5 to 30 foot zone, that are more likely to convey fire to the house. A word about mulch. Many people I've seen will rake up their pine needles and then put down mulch. And so what you're doing is substituting one flammable material for another in some cases. Different types of mulch have different flammabilities. We have a great publication that Steve Quarles was one of the authors on about the flammability of different mulches. I don't use mulch at all. I use compost that I've already composted myself. I use it to mulch, it's a verb, but I don't use any kind of bark or organic material that hasn't been composted. You could use it in plantings, but make sure that it is isolated and does not convey all the way to the house or to your 5 foot zone. That picture on the right-hand side is of fire that started in mulch in the Tubbs fire. So mulch is definitely something you should keep an eye on, even in the 5 to 30 zone. And then out there in the 30 to 100 foot zone. So the main function of this zone is to make sure that you're not conveying a wildfire right to the home. And also, if your house catches on fire, you're not setting the whole woods on fire. And we've had a few fires like that in the Tahoe Basin where a house caught on fire, it went through the woods and it went to a few more houses. So keeping a good defensible reduced fuel zone will reduce that risk. You want to thin out your trees. You want to have islands of vegetation, not a lot of dead stuff. You want to be raking your pine needles in the previous zone as well. Try to have very little on the ground during the fire season, but in the fall, after the fire season is over, as needles fall, it's probably a good idea to leave them. That also reduces erosion from your property and make sure that you're following water quality best management practices. So what should you do about your defensible space? Sure, you should get a defensible space inspection. These are offered for free from all of our local fire districts. Friendly people come to your home and give you a little list of suggestions and can help you understand what would really help protect your home. After that, you should get to work, do some of that work. And we have services in Tahoe to help you do that. We have free chipping services. There are green waste services in most of our communities. So that's a great way of getting rid of the material. And I have to tell you, we're really lucky since I also own a home elsewhere and I had to pay at the dump to take every load of stuff there. And I couldn't believe it because we have organized services and grants that help us get rid of this material. So there's no reason we can't get rid of it. And then think about designing your garden or yard for sustainability for the long run so that it's low maintenance and you're not having to do lots of work over time. One thing that's really difficult to do in Tahoe is to learn how to garden. It's not for the faint of heart. We have a very short garden season, 90 days a year compared to elsewhere in California and Nevada. And so we do have a lot of resources that you can tap on to help you understand how to grow things, what could look good, what could do well. And then here's some of them. We have a great guide on how to choose plants from a garden or nursery. The Backyard Native Plant publication is great. I definitely work with lots of people who don't want to clear very much of their landscape because they love the native plants. And so this guide will give you suggestions on how to trim and manage native plants to reduce the risk in your yard. The Home Landscaping Guide is a classic, and there on the left is a new brochure from our master gardeners that is very simple and helps you understand what kind of plants you actually could put in each of the zone 1 and 2, nothing in zone 0. So I just want to also refer you to our Lake Tahoe Master Gardeners. Master Gardeners are volunteers of the University of California, And also Nevada has those. They have Nevada Master Gardeners. You can give them a call and they can give you suggestions. They have gardening workshops and they can help you understand what might be a good choice to plant in your yard. That would be defensible, easy to maintain, and all of that. So that's it for me. I wanted to give you my email address. Feel free to contact me. And I think it's time for the next poll. Okay, so we would like to know, have you implemented any of the following defensible space actions? And check all that apply, you don't have to choose one. Do you have a non-combustible zone? Have you gotten rid of vegetation or debris from your gutters or cleared stuff from under your deck? Have you removed any trees? And then question number 2 is, what are your barriers to implementing defensible space? Do you not like how it looks? Do you not have access for the full 100 feet? Does it seem overwhelming or expensive? Have you ever had an inspection? That would be helpful as well. And prior to this talk, did you know that shipping is free and available throughout the Tahoe Basin? Or did you know that you could get defensible space inspections for free? So hopefully you're filling it out. How's it looking, Carly?
We're looking pretty good. We had a number of questions there, so people are certainly filling them out. While we have a small break while we're waiting, I just wanted to let everyone know we added a couple of resources in the chat box. So all of those publications and resources that Susie mentioned are all available on the Tahoe Living with Fire website. And we also dropped in a link to request free defensible space and free curbside shipping. If you're located within the Tahoe Basin, those services are available to you for free. All right, so I'm going to end our polling here, Susie.
Okay, 65% of you have created a 5-foot non-combustible zone. That's great, that's amazing. And potentially that also may have to do with the fact that we're in Tahoe and that we have so many people with water quality BMPs. But if you're not in Tahoe and you did it, then you're ahead of your neighbors, I would say. Good for you. Getting debris out of your gutters is pretty common. Clearing veg from under your deck is the most common, and removing some trees. So it looks like pretty good implementation of these practices from the folks on the phone, who you would expect since they care enough to show up to our workshop. Item 2, what are your barriers? It looks like not having access to the full 100 feet is listed as the biggest issue. You could have neighbors next to you, as Christina mentioned. You could have public lands as well. Public lands has the Tahoe Conservancy and the Forest Service. They have people you can contact and complain or ask for collaboration. It's definitely a lot of those non-occupied private lots where it's a lot harder to get anything done, unfortunately. So it looks like a lot of you have that problem. There's a little bit of being overwhelmed, and not as many saying it's too expensive. Maybe that's because of our free shipping services and other supports as well. So I'm glad to hear that. Have you ever had an inspection? 62% said yes. That's awesome. That's a lot higher than I would have thought. Good for you guys. 62% knew that shipping was free and that defensible space inspections were free. So that's great. We're a pretty informed audience. So hopefully you can tell all your neighbors and friends as well, and we can make some dent on this problem.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Susie. Make sure our poll is down. Awesome. Thank you so much, Susie. I sure learned a few things, especially around how do you garden and do defensible space at the same time. Most people think it's going to look like a moonscape, and it doesn't have to be that. So I certainly encourage everybody to have those defensible space inspections, as well as contact master gardeners if you're interested in implementing some gardening around your home and still have defensible space.
It's the thing everyone's doing this summer.
Yes. Yes, we all have a lot of time, so it's perfect.
That's right.
All right, so next up, we have our final presenter and home hardening expert, Steve Quarles. Steve is a University of California Cooperative Extension Advisor Emeritus and the retired Chief Scientist for Wildfire and Durability at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety Research Center. That is definitely a big title, but rightfully so. Steve is known nationally for his work on home hardening, so we're really glad and fortunate to have him here. He will be providing a very in-depth review of exactly why home hardening is important and what specific retrofits you can do to harden your home. So Steve, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Carly, and thanks also to Susie and Christina. So here we go. I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about home hardening issues and how to reduce the vulnerability of your home to wildland fire. During the course of the presentation, I would like just for you to envision what best represents you, your home. Is your home on a very large lot? And so there's a lot of space between you and your neighbor. Are you on a steep slope? Or are you in a neighborhood where your neighboring home, a neighbor's home might be 30 feet or less from you? And depending on which scenario best fits you, then certain things that I'll be talking about will be more or less applicable to you. So we'll just try to envision where you are, and we'll talk about these different kind of scenarios along the way during this presentation. So as you have heard, there are three basic exposures to home, to the home during a wildland fire, or when a home is threatened by a wildland fire. One is windblown embers. I think that's pretty clearly been stated by both Christina and Susie. Windblown embers are responsible for more than 60% of home ignitions. The post-fire reports have indicated between 60 and 90%. But also flame contact and radiant heat are two other exposures that homes must resist. And I'll sort of talk about situations where these become more important. Windblown ember is really important. These are Angora fire pictures. The left-hand picture I took in a post-fire assessment I was working on with CAL FIRE. And the right-hand picture is from a Forest Service report. And I think the important thing here to note is that there's a lot of vegetation that is unburned around both of these homes that are clearly destroyed, indicating that the fire didn't burn to the home itself, that embers flew over the vegetation and ignited something in, on, or next to the home. So embers are so important because of what they can do directly and what they can do indirectly. And so we have some examples here of direct ember ignition and indirect ember ignition. The upper left-hand picture in this slide is from a project I worked on when I was at IBHS at the Research Center in Richburg, South Carolina. It's a very cool facility. And it was an honor to work there. But this shows how we were set up to do wildfire experiments, in particular, understanding the vulnerabilities of buildings to embers. And I think more or equally important, we could evaluate the effectiveness of mitigation strategies by these ember generators. This lab was large enough you could put a full-size building in it, and it was quite a cool place to work. Anyways, we see embers being thrown against the home, and we were able to evaluate a number of vulnerabilities during my time there, and that work continues with my predecessors. Direct ember ignition, we see here a fence, and direct ember ignition is when embers ignite the thing with no help from vegetation. It's just by the material and the component itself. So here we're seeing a fence that is ignited only by the embers that landed on these horizontal ledges at where the post and the plank sort of met. And so there was a ledge, embers landed, ignited the fence directly with no help from anything else. The right-hand picture is from a demonstration we did at IBHS a number of years ago, but it shows a few examples of indirect ignition, and that's when embers ignite things at the base of the home, in this case bark mulch or debris in a gutter. The left-hand picture here is a vinyl gutter, and you notice it's detaching and falling to the ground. The right-hand picture is a metal gutter, and that metal gutter stays put. Indirect ignitions ultimately result in either radiant heat or flame contact to the home itself. So those indirect ember ignitions result ultimately in flames or radiant heat. So I'm going to show a quick video here, if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. Well, it worked during the thingy. So I'm going to, here we go.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry to the audience, but here we go. And I'm going to mute the video so you can't hear what's going on. So this is a demonstration we did back in 2011. At the time, we used this batch process ember generator, and as you're seeing them being loaded, we're putting some vegetation around the home. And this is what's happening here. This is a bark mulch kind of a product. Here the ember generator's running. And you're going to notice pretty quickly that things around the house and on the house are going to start igniting. So, and the other thing I want you to notice is this window screen that is serving as a good screen or preventing embers from entering the home. And that's what a good thing about window screening. So here we have embers igniting bark mulch along the ground at the base of the wall, debris in the gutters, debris on top of the roof. All of these resulting in flames contacting the home itself. We have a couple of different kinds of siding on this house. So there'll be, so here the debris, the gut falling down again. And then a big fire in that interior corner that resulted from wind flow and ignition of bark mulch and other combustible things in that corner. In a minute, we're going to go inside the house and see the screen. This screen is a vinyl clad plastic clad fiberglass screen, and it did a good job of keeping embers out of the home until flames touched it, and which time the screen failed and flames could readily enter. As you can see, this is an unfinished interior, but these flames could be igniting curtains or other furnishings inside the home once that happened. So this is pointing out the importance of this non-combustible zone that Susie has talked about and Christina mentioned also in terms of preventing ember ignitions really close to the home. Okay, don't need that anymore. And as we're sort of harping on this coupled approach, but if you look at this picture, and again, coupled approach, things you do to vegetation and other combustibles on the property, and I think the other combustibles is a really important point. It includes outbuildings, it includes wood piles. It's more than just vegetation, it's anything that's combustible. Where you put them, how you maintain them, and the types of vegetation in particular that you select. So there's that part of it, and then there's things you do in terms of selection of construction materials and what I call design features, and that's how things are put together. And we'll talk about some of these things along the way. You need to do both of these because of what embers can do. You know, you saw that they clearly went from the ember generators in that research center to the home, but they can be transported for you know, up to a mile and clearly a quarter mile, half a mile in enough quantity to ignite things. And so if you can see in this picture that the fire could burn all the way to the home in this case because of all the vegetation that's there. But if you removed all of the vegetation, homeowners do not have enough control over vegetation far enough away from the home to preclude embers landing on the home. So this coupled approach is important because of the need for the home to resist embers, and also, you know, the defensible space part is just to minimize the chance that the fire can burn directly to the home. This is a good example of non-combustible zone. The left-hand picture and the right and the center picture, these are from the Waldo Canyon fire, but you know, you can see these kind of examples that Susie showed from Tahoe. Good zone on the left-hand picture, and then including the under part of the deck, the footprint of the deck. You really, and as shown in the lower right-hand picture, you really can't have your own personal lumberyard stored under your deck and expect that deck to perform well during a wildland fire scenario. And I think it's important just to remember that that wood pile that you see in the, or the lumber pile you see in the lower right-hand picture, before the embers come, debris will have accumulated in that wood pile, making it that much more easy for embers to ignite. The fine fuels in there, and then the larger members that you see, resulting in a flaming exposure to the underside of the deck. And it's really difficult for a deck to resist that kind of exposure. It's important also to remember that when you're talking about this non-combustible zone, you need to consider or incorporate a vertical zone also. And this is between the ground and the start of your siding. That needs to be also non-combustible. Typically, you have that because of a concrete foundation, but there are situations where you don't, and you need to do what you can to create that vertical zone, because embers will accumulate at this ground to siding intersection and ignite the siding. So the right-hand picture is a study we did at IBHS that just demonstrated that when siding goes all the way to the ground, you can ignite the siding with strictly an ember exposure. And this non-combustible zone between the ground and the start of the siding is a good feature that has to accompany this horizontal non-combustible zone that we've talked about earlier today. There are certain situations where radiant heat and flame contact become really important, and that's when your neighbors are really close. So in every case, in imparting ember resistance to a structure or to your home is really important. And a lot of research has found that if it's just embers you need to worry about, then it's small detail-y things that matter much more than strictly the material itself. But when your neighbor's really close by, embers are important, but if should your neighbor's home ignite, then that will, and it's close by, then that will result in potentially flames, but definitely radiant heat, which the radiant heat can break glass in a window. It can preheat the siding, making it more likely to ignite. These are situations where material matters, and also neighborhood collaboration matters a lot, so that you are all in there together to minimize the chance that the first building ignites, the first home ignites, because that can threaten neighboring buildings, and it can be sort of a domino effect, as we see that happen in Coffee Park during the Tubbs fire. Okay, and this is just a picture from a Eastern Tennessee fire that I did a post-fire investigation on, and it just shows the importance of radiant heat. And so you have two pictures here. The left-hand picture shows, the left-hand picture was taken probably 10 minutes or so before the right-hand picture. But this home here on the left of the picture, and the left-hand side of the left-hand picture, and the same building, same home on the right-hand picture, the left-hand home that my cursor, I think you can see. These are the same home. And so this in the left-hand picture, the home that's burning pretty vigorously, radiant heat alone resulted in glass breakage on the wall facing the home. Fire got into this 4 or 5 floor cabin, sort of hanging off of a hill in Eastern Tennessee. And 10 or 15 minutes later, you had this rather big fire, but it was because of the radiant heat exposure. So there are definitely times when radiant heat is important and flame contact is important, and it occurs when homes are close to each other. So we have this checklist in the guide that has been mentioned. And typically when we talk about home survival and things you can do to a home, we talk about it by component. And so, here we show the defensible space that Susie talked about. And then there are the various parts of the home: roof, vents, exterior wall, and attachments, which include fencing and decking. So we're going to sort of walk through some of these during the next few minutes, and talk about them by component, and we'll talk about why certain ones are important, and also things we can do to mitigate or reduce the vulnerability of your home. So before we do that, I want to ask Carly to give us another poll question, and we'll come back and do some more at the end of the presentation. So Carly.
Absolutely. And Steve, we missed our beginning poll, so we're just going to do both of them right now, which is totally
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I apologize for that.
No worries. All right, so what barriers do you have to implementing home hardening projects? Looks like answers are still coming in pretty quick. We'll give it one more second. It looks like we have about half, so I'm going to stop polling here and share the results with you, Steve.
Okay, so looks like barriers, the main barrier is too expensive, I don't have time. And then the other major one is not knowing what to do. So I hope that during the course of the rest of the presentation, you'll have some idea what to do. The cost, I also hope that you'll learn some things that are sweat equity kind of things. So not so expensive. There are definitely things that are expensive, but not everything is expensive too. And many of the not expensive things are effective. So the second question, what part of your home do you think is most vulnerable to wildland fire? We're going to come back and ask you the same question at the end. So just what do you think? And then we'll talk about it along the way, and you'll either have your mind changed or you'll stick to the answer that you're providing right now.
Yeah. And thank you all so much for participating in these polls. They help us to create resources in the future and help to bring down some of those barriers. So I really appreciate everybody's willingness to help in these polls. All right, Steve, we have about 70% of folks have responded, so I'm going to end it and share it with you. Okay.
So the most vulnerable that people think is the deck, with roof and siding also right up there. So that's good. We'll come back and talk about this after the at the end. So let's go. We'll start with the roof. There are so this is a picture of a roof, and it's what I would call a complex roof, meaning that it has various shapes on it. So the recommendation by fire officials all over the place, and guidance by fire safe councils and the like, Living with Fire program, is to put a Class A fire rated roof covering on your home. And it can be a Class A by itself, and sometimes it needs help from additional fire resistant material. That's this gray thing that we're seeing in the lower left-hand picture. I'm sorry, I'm going to try to do this again because it's easier to see. Okay, so this guy here. But I think the importance that I wanted to talk about is that the fire rating of the roof really tells you about how the roof is going to perform in the field of the roof, away from edges. If you have a complex roof, such as the one shown here, you have other edges where the roof meets something else, and that can also make the roof vulnerable to wildfire, in particular to embers. So we have a roof to wall here, this dormer, we have roof to gutter, we have roof to skylight, we have roof to vent, and these are things that can make the roof vulnerable to wildfire and go beyond what the information that is provided by the fire rating of the roof itself. So here we have an example of that. We have debris accumulating at this roof to wall intersection, and embers can ignite this debris And the roof can be vulnerable because of the siding right next to the roof, right at this location. The right-hand picture is from IBHS Research Center, again, during one of the demonstrations we did, showing how easily embers can ignite, in this case, pine needle debris, which is exactly what we're seeing in the left-hand picture. You don't want the siding next to your roof to become the vulnerable part of the roof. You don't want that siding to compromise the protection offered by the Class A roof covering. So you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And you can remove debris from the roof. You can change siding locally in these situations and put a non-combustible product on in cases where you have combustible siding material. You also notice that this under eave area is being impinged on by the flame. So you can harden that by putting some non-combustible material in this area also. And then we have a couple of options here, things to talk about here. One is the type of roof covering. There are certain kinds of roof covering where you have an opening between the roof covering itself and the roof deck. So we can see this in this metal roof example. It can also occur in clay barrel tile roofs. The vulnerability here is this opening where debris can accumulate before the fire comes. If the opening is big enough, then rodents and birds can build nests in there, which provides fine fuels for the embers. And then when wildland fire is threatening, embers can enter the same area and ignite those fine fuels, and then you have a flaming exposure to the structural part of the roof, the sheathing. So you need to plug these areas. You can do that with a non-combustible material such as a mineral wool product. You can just stuff it in there, even if it's an existing roof. And other things, you can handmade other kinds of things, but I think the mineral wool is an easiest one just to shove in there. And then we have the debris accumulating in gutters. So there's two things here. One is to install a non-combustible, a metal gutter cover that minimizes the debris accumulation inside the gutter. And the other thing to do that we recommend is to incorporate, if you don't have it, to insert a metal drip edge. And that metal drip edge at this roof edge will protect the combustible part of that roof edge, which is typically a wood fascia or wood sheathing. So those two things can help reduce the vulnerability of the roof. And there are other things in the guide that we talk about. So let's talk a little bit about vents. Vents are vulnerable when embers enter through the vent into the attic space or the crawl space and ignite combustible materials inside that space. Many of us store stuff in the attic. Some people store stuff in the crawl space, and it's the boxes of this and that become vulnerable to the ember ignition. There are a number of studies that have been done on the vulnerability of various kinds of vents. Some are more vulnerable than others, and we'll talk about some of that here. And again, when that guide comes out. So with the under eave area, there's two basic kinds of construction for under eave. One is where you look up and you can see the rafter tail. This is called open eave. And the vents are typically in the blocking between the rafter tails. And then the soffitted eave is when you have a horizontal return from the roof edge back to the siding. And that can be a panel product. It can be, as shown here, it can be planks. Typically there's tongue and groove or shiplap joint here between the boards. Often there is a strip vent in the soffitted eave because that's the inlet air for venting. So research has shown that this soffitted eave design is far less vulnerable to ember entry than the blocking in open eave design. So if you have this kind of construction, you can retrofit by adding, by enclosing the vent, by enclosing the under eave area, creating a soffitted vent, and then incorporating this strip vent to provide the ventilation needed for moisture management purposes. There are a number of flame and ember resistant vents that are on the market, particularly if you're in California, Nevada. They're easily they're commercially available, easy to find. There's a number of brands, and I've shown all the ones that are commercially available. There's Vulcan, O'Hagan, Brand Guard, and Embers Out. These are all available, and we can talk more about, well, you can go to websites and find out information about them in particular, and we have some information in the guide again about them. So for vents, you want to make sure that the mesh that you have is in good condition. Code says in California and I think Nevada side, you can have 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch mesh screening. A lot of research has shown that 1/4 inch mesh screen is too coarse. It's easy for embers large enough to ignite things on the other side. So the 1/4 inch we don't really recommend anymore. 1/8 of an inch at the minimum, and then 1/16 of an inch is better. 1/16 of an inch mesh screening, easy to plug up, more maintenance on your part to keep them free of debris. If you're storing stuff in the attic, don't store them close to the vent because that will create a situation where embers can accumulate against that thing. And if flame contact is likely, I'll show you a picture in a minute of likely, and then you should really consider the flame and ember resistant options that are out there. Skylights, there are two or three kinds of skylights, depending on how you count. There's glass type, which are flat, and dome type, which are plastic. And then you have skylights that can open. We see some pictures in the lower right-hand side, flattish roof, flat type roof. You notice that the flat type are more likely to accumulate debris than the dome type. So on a flat roof, you might want to consider a dome type because it is less likely to accumulate debris. Really, though, the best thing is to keep debris off the roof, and it is a maintenance thing. These two homeowners could have done a better job of that. Exterior walls are vulnerable, or combustible walls are vulnerable if ignition occurs and flame burns up the wall. This just passes the problem on to other parts of the wall, whether it be a window or the under eave area. This is a demonstration I did a number of years ago. Both of these had the same kind of exposure, but the combustible wall got a pretty big fire burning up it. This is a non-combustible siding product here, a fiber cement siding product. Nothing much happened there. So flame spread up the wall is one of the vulnerabilities, and then penetration at a lap joint is another vulnerability. And this is that picture I talked about. This is from a demonstration, again, at the IBHS research facility in Richburg, South Carolina. Ember ignition of bark mulch, and it was a wood mulch product at the base of the wall. Ignition of the siding burning, flames burning up the wall. They did this a number of times. Sometimes the glass broke, sometimes it didn't in the window, but it always burned up the wall. In this under eave area on this gable end side of the wall, flames burned into the attic at this location and then through the vent here. So if you have combustible siding, then flames touching the vent is likely. It's possible depending on whether or not that siding ignites. This is a really good argument for again, this non-combustible zone horizontally away from the home so that you minimize the chance of ignition occurring and flames climbing up the wall and impinging on window, vent, and the under eave area. There's a lot of interest, I think, these days in using fire retardant coatings as a protective measure. And, I'll agree that is arguably the cheapest way to provide protection to siding if you have combustible siding. The problem is that research that we did at IBHS and that NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, recently conducted also, indicate that the fire retardant coatings are not currently a viable option just because they don't weather well in exterior locations. They're used commonly in interior locations, but the moisture change, the temperature change, the humidity changes on combustible products make them currently not really, the service life of them is not predictable. So we don't recommend using them now. I think in the future, it likely the technology will change enough that they will be a viable option. Right now, they just aren't. Chapter 7A in the California Building Code says you cannot use coatings to comply. So they just aren't ready for use right yet. A lot of research has shown that the glass is the most vulnerable part of the window. So the frame part and the glass part. Glass is by far the most vulnerable part. So we're recommending dual pane windows, tempered glass, or multi-pane windows, tempered glass. And this figure on the right just demonstrates how windows are vulnerable. And it's this temperature differential between the exposed part of the glass and the protected part of the glass, the part of the glass that is protected by the frame. That temperature difference results in cracks that propagate from the edge in. If enough of those cracks propagating in, the window can fall out. So this outer pane is protecting the inner pane. That's why multi-pane windows are good, because you have layers of protection. And then tempered glasses provide 3 to 4 times the protection, the resistance to heat than regular anneal glass. So tempered glass is also a good feature. Going to quickly finish up here. So decks are vulnerable if embers land on them, or if flames come up from a surface fire from below. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these. This picture, you saw it before, but I think it's important for in this particular case, to show where embers accumulate sort of commonly. So embers will accumulate at this ground to wall intersection, and then they flow outwards on smooth surfaces to some distance away from the home. So where, from an ember perspective, decks are vulnerable at this deck to the wall, and the upper right-hand picture shows debris accumulating at this deck to wall intersection. This is a home near Echo Summit, so Tahoe people know exactly where that is. Not the home necessarily, but the area. And embers will accumulate here, and they'll ignite the deck potentially, but definitely this shingle siding. So that's not good. And then outboard, out in this area away from the home, embers will accumulate in the between deck board gaps, and they'll fall through the gap where there isn't a joist. But where there's a joist, they're going to accumulate, and that's where the ignition is going to occur. But they will fall through this gap onto what's below. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to have a non-combustible zone under the footprint of the deck, because embers will fall through the crack and land there and ignite that stuff. So what can you do? As a retrofit item, you can incorporate metal flashing if you have combustible siding. You want to make sure that flashing gets between, that water cannot get between the flashing and the siding, because that'll rot it. So you want to let what's called let the flashing in at a lap joint, so that water will come down and then land on the deck, and then embers will be accumulated against a non-combustible thing. So that's one thing we can do. This is an experiment, again, that I conducted at IBHS. There's a couple of things to show here. One is that the ember ignition at this gap, it's a small fire, but it can burn all the way to the home. And that's what's happening here. And the other thing on the right-hand picture is that the fires typically in deck fires are big in the underdeck area, until they burn through these gaps between deckboard gaps and fire gets on top of the deck. But initially, it's a large fire under the deck. And so again, keeping debris and not storing combustibles under the deck is a good thing, because you end up with a big fire when you have ignitions that can impinge on the underside of the deck. This is a little bit problematic because it's not a big fire, it's a small fire that burns, and then it's really at what's at the wall that will dictate how big the fire is going to be. And you have to remember that during a wildland fire, you can have multiple multiple of these multiple fires burning to the home, to the deck, to the home. So not just the one that we used in this experiment. And so one strategy that is cheaper by far than replacing the deck is, particularly this works well if you have a deck where the boards are parallel to the home, is to remove one deck board and replace it with a non-combustible option, a metal deck board or a metal grate. And that will stop the fire in its tracks, so to speak, because it'll meet something non-combustible. I don't recommend horizontal enclosure if you have a deck board gap. And this is because you're going to replace a fire problem with a rot and corrosion of fastener problem. So if you have a solid surface deck, then enclosing horizontally is something that you can do. If you're going to enclose vertically, because of, again, moisture issues, you want to make sure you enclose with something that is breathable. And so screening is a good idea if you want to enclose vertically. And this enclosing vertically is a really good idea, particularly when your deck is low to the ground, because it's hard to clean out the deck in that area, in that case. So the screening will minimize the accumulation of debris under that low to the ground deck, and it'll minimize the entry of embers in that same area. If your deck is overhanging a slope, really, this is one situation where a solid surface deck and a horizontal enclosure of that solid surface deck makes sense. And also the vegetation management is also really important. So removal of trees to prevent crown firing, burning up slope is important. That's what happened during this Waldo Canyon fire in Colorado Springs. There was a crown fire, burned up slope, 5 homes lost because of ignition of decks and then burning into the home from there. If you have shrubbery and not trees, then you can put a non-combustible retaining wall 40 feet or so, let's say 20 to 30 feet downslope. That'll divert the fire, but it doesn't work if it's a tree, because a forest will burn over top of any retaining wall that you can build. Then finally, or next to finally, if you have a garage, most of us, well, garages are notorious for storing many things. And so it's important that the garage door be closed. Same with windows. Actually, when a wildfire is threatening, close your windows, close your garage door. And then you want to make sure that where the garage door meets the framing, that it's well sealed so that embers cannot enter through there. So that's, and then if you have a detached garage, just remember it has its own defensible space. And finally, fencing. So again, we saw this picture at the beginning. So ember ignition of fencing is pretty common. We found in some research at IBHS that what I call the privacy fence, where all the planks are on side, is more vulnerable to ember ignition than the other kinds of planking design. So whether a lattice fence, or as we see on this right-hand picture here, a good neighbor fence where the planks alternate between the horizontal members. These are more porous, harder for embers to land and accumulate without sort of blowing through. So they would be better choices from an ember resistance perspective. The other thing that was really clear is that minimizing accumulation of debris at the base of the fence is really important. That debris ignites pretty easily, and that helps fire propagate to the home once it's ignited. So, you know, the strategies, again, where fence connects to home, non-combustible component, a 5-foot minimum, sometimes a fence section is longer than that. So a 5-foot minimum, remove debris at the base of the fence. And then as I said, lattice and good neighbor designs are less vulnerable to ember ignition than that privacy fence. And this we're showing here is a privacy fence. So it would be more vulnerable to an ember ignition. So just summarizing, you know, remember where you are on the home, and then you can rely on this, use this checklist to help you think about things to make your home less vulnerable to wildfire. And then think about it in terms of defensible space, and then the principal components of your home: the roof, the vents, the exterior wall, including the undereave area, and then attachments, including decks and fencing. So thank you very much. I think Carly has some poll questions for us, and here's my email address if you have some particular questions for me. But again, I appreciate your attention, and I'm going to answer the poll myself.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve. That was extremely informative. I'm sure many of you are sitting there wondering where you even start. So that checklist that Steve shared, I will be sharing that in our post-event email. So be looking for that. And so our questions here: what part of your home do you think is the most vulnerable to wildfire? This is the same question as before. So let us know what you think. Which home retrofit actions are you most likely to take? So we're curious in knowing, figuring out what will you actually do? And then last question: how likely are you to take the steps to harden your home to wildfire? So it looks like we have right about half of folks have responded. So I'm going to end our polling and just do a quick share. So it looks like deck is still there. Steve, is that correct?
So I would say that any horizontal thing is definitely vulnerable. Deck, but roof is also vulnerable in my mind. And depending on the complexity of the roof, it could be more vulnerable. If you have a lot of roof to whatever intersections, it could be vulnerable, equally so. A deck is vulnerable because it connects to the house, and there's many things that you can walk out on to get to that deck. And so, you know, I appreciate the deck answer. I also am a big fan of vulnerability of roof. And then the retrofit actions, I agree that covering vents with 1/8 inch mesh screen is really effective, and it's easy to do. So I agree with that one. And then I'm happy to see that 85% roughly of participants are going to do something to harden their home. So there we go. Thanks again, and take it away, Carly.
Yes, well, thank you so much for that, Steve. Let me pull up my screen. So next we are going to transition, should be pulling up. Yep. So next we're just going to transition into our Q&A. We are running a little short on time, so we won't get to everybody's questions, but we're going to come up with a system to answer everyone's questions, because I do think this is extremely valuable. So we will be providing an email and a follow-up to make sure that your questions are answered. So if you don't hear it, our apologies, but we will get there. So first question: is 1/16 vent screens do not seem readily available at local home improvement stores. Do you recommend buying a roll of the mesh, or cutting it to size, or attaching it to the outside of the eave with staples or something along those lines? Or do you suggest buying the pre-cut add-on screens to put on the outside of the existing eave vents?
So I would go with buy a roll of 16th inch mesh screen and cut it to size, and install it in the place that is easiest for you to access. If that's from the inside, do it from the inside. If it's from the outside, do it from the outside. Just remember, with the 16th inch mesh screen, it will require more vigilance on your part to keep debris from accumulating on the screen.
Yeah. And then is there any other effective way to do this? So you already talked about the different types of vents.
So there are, if you have open eave construction, you can change to a soffited eave, because they don't enter as readily when the wind flow is parallel to the vent opening compared to perpendicular to the vent opening. Gable end vents are more vulnerable. Vents in open eave are more vulnerable. So you can change out the vents, even if you have an existing home. I would suggest that you send us or me an email, and we can sort of walk through that if you're interested. It's more than a few second explanation.
Okay, great, thank you. Another vent question. So what is the current code for vent screening?
Current code says that you will have a screening between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch. There are certain provisions that will force one of the fancier flame and ember resistant vents depending on certain other things. But at a minimum, 1/8 of an inch vent, 1/8 of an inch screening is the maximum size. 1/16 of an inch is also allowed.
Great. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Does the California Building Code contain requirements for retrofit versus new home construction?
Chapter 7A of the California Building Code applies only to new construction. If your home was built after 2008, when Chapter 7A became effective, and you do a remodel, then that remodel will come under Chapter 7A in terms of retrofitting. Certain jurisdictions also have incorporated significant remodel language in the code adoption process. And so even if your home is pre-2008 in California, you will have to, you would have to comply with that code. I think the bottom line is you should check with your building department to see exactly how they adopted Chapter 7A and whether significant remodel language is in it or not.
Okay, great recommendation. We probably have just time for one more question. Do stainless steel screens fastened under the deck assist with mitigating sparks?
Yes, but attached under the deck, a flaming exposure is more likely there, and screening doesn't really do much to reduce flames impinging through them. So I would say your best bet here is to create and maintain that non-combustible zone under the footprint of the deck.
Perfect. Okay, well, again, my apologies for not quite having enough time to go to everybody's questions, but like I said, we will be sending a follow-up email and hope to get all of your questions answered through that email. Again, I included this this checklist of actions, and I was going to spend some time running through it, but I don't want to go over. We're trying to respect your time here. So again, I will be sending this in our follow-up email. So I think the key takeaway here is just really look at this list, walk around your home with it, and really look at it as a checklist of things that will help your home survive in a wildfire. So I encourage you all to take a look at that checklist. So one of my last slides here, last certainly not least, I have a little bit of a shameless plug encouraging you to connect with the Tahoe network. So if you enjoyed tonight's workshop, we do many workshops like this all the time, ranging from defensible space to evacuation planning and everything in between. And so some of the ways you can connect with us are through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also visit the Tahoe Living with Fire website, which acts as kind of a clearinghouse of all wildfire related information in Tahoe. So I highly encourage you to check out that website. And then I would encourage you to sign up to receive the Tahoe Network monthly e-newsletter. This is where we keep wildfire kind of in your inbox year round with tips on how to prepare, as well as we advertise for all of our upcoming events through that platform. All right, and then, so we are, and as you've heard probably a couple of times throughout this workshop, and I'm sure you're kind of confused, what is this guide they're all talking about? We maybe should have opened with it, but I don't know. But here we are. So we are working on a peer-reviewed publication with all of this type of information, plus much more detail. And it will be published at the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension, hopefully by the end of the year is our goal. And so I will be sending out this follow-up email. And when I do, I will have a system in place so you can sign up to stay updated on this guide. So once we publish it, you will get an email that once we publish it, we'll tell you it's published. We can mail you one, all those things. But all of those beautiful illustrations you saw throughout everybody's presentations are all in that guide. And really, we hope it's going to be a really valuable resource for our communities. Okay, and that is all I have. So thank you all so much for attending tonight's workshop. And thanks again to Steve, Susie, and Christina for presenting, as well as all the other partners that make this happen. Again, if you didn't get your question answered, you can email fire@tahoercd.org, and I will make sure we answer your questions. Or you can wait until you get the follow-up email and respond that way. So just know we want to answer your questions. We're really excited about you taking these steps. So we're not going to leave you in the dark here. So please email us and stay in touch. And so thanks again for attending, and I hope to see you all at future events.